Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session, What I Wish I Would Have Known Sooner. Belinda and I are here today to talk about some of the topics like SID and testing and answer any sort of questions you might have about these topics. So my name is Heather Williams. I am the Student Data and Assessment Specialist for the Adult Academic Program of Robbinsdale area schools. And I've been working in that role for just about 8 years now. And then Belinda, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Belinda Gonzalez, and I am the Data Assistance Coordinator for Minneapolis Adult Education. And part of my work involves student-facing services such as intake and testing as well. And thank you for being here.
So like I mentioned, we're going to just cover some basic topics, things that relate to working in an office support role and some tips and tricks that we've learned that hopefully will be helpful for you in your role as well. And we hope you'll take away some information about this and bring it back to your program and take some of our suggestions and things that we've learned along the way to go ahead and help you make your job easier. So we're going to start by talking about registration. And I think that the session title being What I Wish I Would Have Known Sooner is a really interesting topic right now because we've been navigating, as you know, I think in Wendy's session, she mentioned we've been doing this for 18 plus months, dealing with a pandemic, having to go to online learning. And we had to kind of reassess what our policies and procedures were to make sure that we were still able to serve our community and our students during this pandemic. So a couple of things that I have really found to be helpful in doing online learning with our students, we had to make everything available to our students virtually. And one of the biggest things that I implemented actually right prior to the pandemic was making sure that I had access to any sort of student information and registration information before they actually came to our program to register. So this is why we say SID pre-check. If you can get that information about your students prior to them signing up for classes, it's really easy to look up that student by their name or their birth date is actually really helpful because sometimes their last name may have changed or they were under a different name at a different site. But what is super helpful about this for me in my role is if I can have access to that student's information and look them up prior to them coming in for registration, if they've attended another site in Minnesota, as you know, their information would already be in our SID database. So doing this SID pre-check oftentimes helps me figure out if they've already taken a test at a different site. So when I enter them, I can look up any previous information about them. And oftentimes that will save us from even having to do any sort of pre-testing because there's already information in SID about the tests that they may have taken at a different site or with us previously if they attended as our students. So the two ways you can do that, you can use person search. Like I said, I normally look people up with their birth date because again, their name may have changed. And if they do exist, their record will show up and you can choose to add that student to your site. Or you can use the re-entry button for students who are returning from your site previously that they may have attended in previous years. So it's been really helpful for me to have that information. And that leads me into my next point here about Google Forms. So what happened for us is when we had to go, fully online, we used to have students come in and fill out a paper registration form. I would look them up in SID at that point, determine what testing they might need. And now that we've been having students sign up online, we use a Google form. So we made a whole form with basic information to gather about those students. And when you use a Google form that way, you can actually import it into a spreadsheet and you can track those students that are filling out that form. So that's now how I get all of our student information. And I look them up prior to them coming in for any sort of registration appointment because we are now doing registration appointments in person. It's actually, this Google form has been so handy for me. That's actually what I used to make sure that all of our participants today could sign up for this conference. And that's how I track everybody's email addresses so I can communicate with everybody about the agenda and all of the links. And then that's also how I'll be getting everybody's email addresses to be able to send them the evaluation at the end of the conference. It's very easy to filter information that way too, having it in that Google spreadsheet.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if people wanted to, if they're very interested about Google Forms, there will be a session on Google Forms at 2 p.m. with Susan Wenenkamp. She's really good. She goes into very much detail about it. This slide is a sample of what student will see when they first access the student registration. And so oftentimes the first thing will be a description of why we are, like where they are and why is this form here. There might be a place where they will be able to hear or see or read the Tennyson warning before they start providing that information. For Minneapolis adult education, we have the form translated into 4 languages. 4 languages: English, Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. And each of them has their separate buttons so that the person at the website can just choose whichever form they prefer to answer.
And Rachel, I see your question. I wanted to just say, if anybody has questions at any point, feel free to chat it out to Belinda and I, and we'll answer them as we go through. Just as anything pops up, this is really an open forum for us to answer any questions you might have about the information we cover. And I see, so Rachel, what we do for our site right now, we have the link to that Google form on our website. Our marketing person actually put a nice little button right on our website that says register today. And when they click on that on our website, it is right, it comes right up to the Google form and they fill it out. And like Belinda mentioned, we do have the Tennyson warning right on that form. At the bottom, they read through it before they hit submit. And we were given the okay that does qualify as they're reading through that information. They're agreeing to submit their information to us, so that's just like them checking the box that they read it on a paper pencil form. Sometimes students have a hard time navigating to the website and they may need a little bit more help. Sometimes it's hard to communicate our email or our website address over the phone to students. So if we're having a hard time getting that through to them over the phone, if they're calling in wanting to register, what we'll do is we try to get their email address from them, and then we do just send them a direct link via email. And we don't typically do any sort of texting at our site just because we don't have like a work cell phone, and we don't want to be giving out our personal phone numbers. But I know there are some workarounds for that. I know some programs have implemented some sort of texting program where it gives out a generic number. And I believe we've used that in the past as well. But typically email is really the easiest way for us to get that information across if the students are having a hard time jotting it down over the phone.
And actually, Rachel, later on in the presentation, there's a tip on how to be able to text to a phone number from your email. So you will, draft an email, but it will be sent to the person's phone as a text with the link. These are just some shots of the Minneapolis adult education behind the scenes, what happens after the student submits their information to us. So as Heather mentioned before, the Google form has relates the information into spreadsheet. And so this is what it looks like in the behind the scenes. Actually, not exactly this, but basically the fields that you put into the form will appear as the headers of the columns. Now, for us in Minneapolis, it looks a little bit more complicated than that. We have extra columns, and it's only because our forms are translated into different languages. And also, we have worked with our technical person to automate a lot of the features that can help us, be more efficient as we process this information and put it into SID. Also, we are using this data to help us track the student from the point where they turn in their data to us, to the point where we putting into SID, to the point where we're contacting the student for the next step, which is the testing, scheduling for the testing, and to the final step for LSS, where they schedule the student into the orientation class. So as you can see, some of the columns, the headers are intake, counseling and testing, because that kind of prompts us and reminds us, oh yeah, we need to go back to this and make sure that we have added the counseling and testing. We have a sort of registration progress that kind of allows whoever is taking care of that particular intake or registration to get a sort of like a sense of where they are and if they need to come back. We also have a section where we can add the scheduling assessment date and time, where, because we have 2 locations, north and south. We also have a section in the form that is very similar to SID, where it's asking if the person has any disabilities. Minneapolis Adult Education, we are one of the programs that are authorized to, not authorized, but we get a grant of support from PANDA to serve visually and blind students, visually impaired and blind students, as well as students with mobilities. And as many of you are probably in your program serving folks with mental health as well. And so what this particular column indicates is that it tells us that we will need to pay attention and make sure that if they check yes on the box, we need to follow up so that we can add their extended time if they qualify. And then it has a timestamp so that we know when it was received. And then it goes on with the different fields that are matching exactly to SID. So it's easier to transfer the information. Thank you.
And our spreadsheet looks very similar to this. However, it's a little, I would say mine is a little less advanced than this, Belinda. I was really impressed by what this looks like and all the information that you're tracking. When students submit their registration form online and we look at that spreadsheet, everyone in our office has the ability to access that. And the way that we're handling it is we color code ours. So if a student's been called, they're highlighted in green. So we know somebody reached out to that student to go ahead and make that initial contact and schedule that appointment. Then when they have an appointment scheduled, they're highlighted in blue. And so then we know, okay, this person is, we can check our online spreadsheet for our appointment times. We know that that student has actually been scheduled their time to come in and do their registration and testing. And then we even go back to it when the student starts, we highlight them in yellow. So we know that that person came in, they got all their testing and registration done, and then boom, they're in class and showing up for school. So kind of similar, but again, ours is a little more simplified, but this is amazing.
And I mean, the end goal is the same, right? I mean, we want to be able to capture the information correctly from the student and also be able to simplify the path, the way that we enter into SID, kind of like, you know, make it more user-friendly. And so I think that even if your program is small and a simple form will do, I think that you have to keep in mind that what is the goal is to gather that information as best possible and then make it easier for you to then enter into SID and then track the student thereafter. So
and I think it's really helpful too when everyone in the office who's working with students is able to access it. I think that's been the best part of all of our documents being electronic.
Correct.
We started that prior to the pandemic, but it's really sped up making everything electronic when the pandemic happened. And it just makes it easier if I'm not there for some reason, like if I'm in the back office administering GED exams, I know that anyone in the office has all of this information and it's shared with everybody. So we can all kind of fill in for each other and make sure that none of our students are falling through the cracks. So one of the things when we did have to go fully online is obviously we were encouraged, if we were using an online registration, we were told, you know, it's not in the best interest to ask for a student social security number online. So what we did is when we came back to doing in-person registrations, obviously we have to be cognizant of how many social security numbers we're gathering for the data matching that needs to happen from the state and federal level. So this is one thing we implemented in our registration process when a student comes in for that appointment, is we give them this small form to fill out, because these are things we don't ask for on the actual online registration form. But as we know, it's important to get those social security numbers so we can keep making sure we're meeting that percentage so we can do the data match. And this has seemed to be really helpful. Our students don't mind filling this out when they come in for that appointment. And so I've definitely seen our percentages increase now that we're back to doing the in-person registration, even though some of our classes are still online. Students do come in for that initial appointment and they will fill this out for us. And so then what I do is I get this form from the student, and then I go ahead and update their SID record to reflect the social security number and any of this information, because you can just go into SID and edit that student's record and add in whatever additional information you've gathered from them.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Heather, that this is a really good tool to have in hand, because not only because of the Social Security, but also sometimes it's difficult to communicate around disabilities, especially with different cultures and so on, and their understanding of what is a disability and what does it mean. And so this piece of paper kind of provides them a visual, again, that if they miss that, right, like you can say, is there anything else in this form that we need to talk about or fill out or something like that. And so that makes it easier to start that conversation about disabilities for us, other than just trying to gather that information blindly. Sometimes on the forms they click on disability, but they actually, it just means that they need glasses. And so we just clarify thereafter, but this is a really good visual for the student when they come in.
So we do have a couple questions about social security numbers. So Pamela, yes, you can still add any student's hours. If you don't get a social security number from somebody, it doesn't affect any sort of funding. It's just really about, we want to gather, I think as a state as a whole, we want to be 70% or above, because if we're 70% or above with gathering those social security numbers for people that have them or want to provide them, then the federal level can actually go ahead and they track a bunch of different things that we're not responsible for, like, employment. So they'll look at what our students are doing after they leave our program. And the way they do that data match is by using the student social security numbers that we provide. So as a state, if we're 70% or higher, they say, okay, that's enough of a percentage of social security numbers of the students that you're serving. So then they're comfortable with that's providing enough of a general idea of our overall student population, even though they know that that's not every single student's social security number. So that's the reason why it's important. But no, you can totally gather any hours for that student without the social security number. And it's not required to put it into SID. We know some of our students don't have a social security number, and that's okay. If they say no or don't want to provide it, that's totally up to them. We don't put any pressure on them to provide it, but we do try to explain that the reason we're gathering it is so we can show the state and federal level that we're doing our jobs by providing these services to our students. And then, Belinda, do you want to just save the translator for your resources?
Yeah, let's do that at the end. Thanks.
And then I'll just mention, I can mention Google Translate then too. So we've been using that a lot at our in-person registrations.
Okay, so this is another Google form, but this is the back end of it. And actually it's not a Google form. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's a spreadsheet, but it's made from Google spreadsheet. So basically what this is it helps, it's another way to help us track the appointments. So now that we have the data into the SID and we're contacting the student and we're asking them, when are you available to come? Then we transfer that information here. We just kind of add the name of the student, the ID, if we know it, the telephone number, and which side do they want to come in person to test, and the dates and times. This allow us to have some sort of sense of how many people it's going to be in the building. And now with COVID rising, we're very aware of, how much traffic and how much, space we have available. And so we does, have this tool to help us. It's very easy to make. It's just really a spreadsheet, and you can make that in Google Sheets and then share it with the rest of the office.
Oh, the joys of working from home, by the way. I just had to run off camera for a second because my my furry coworker heard a noise. So bear with me. If you hear her barking, I'm sorry. So like I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about SID also. I get the most useful data out of SID. So Belinda and I really just wanted to touch on some of the reports that are most useful and helpful. So I'm going to cover these 4. And we wanted to really pull up SID live and show everyone, but we can't show any student data on our Zoom meetings. So I tried to do some screenshots, but if you ever need more clarification about any of this, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Belinda. The SID team obviously is always there to help as well. So at the top of the screen here, I've got the reports circled in red there. And then one thing to just point out in that top toolbar, that's what it looks like when you log into SID. That help tab also has a ton of things that you can search by keyword if you're ever struggling with anything in SID. So feel free to use that, or like I said, reach out to the SID staff or either of us. So these are the reports that I have the arrows by are really what I use the most. And monthly, I'm using that desk audit, and I'll talk a little bit more about what's included in that. The no EFL and the COVID EFL exemption have been super helpful when we're back trying to get students tested. We know that COVID exemption ended in, October 1st. So really we're trying to get NRS tests for all of our students, and I'll show you a little bit more of what that looks like. Another thing I'm often monitoring, especially, right now, figuring out what contact hours look like and how we're most effectively offering programming for our students as we're thinking about potentially heading back into where contact hours are counting again, and we need to pay closer attention to it, is that site 5-year attendance. That's a really helpful report to pull that I can show to my program manager quickly, and show to our director of community education quickly. That just kind of tracks how many hours we've accumulated each month, and it gives you the last 5 years. And then the demographic charts, I love. It's such a nice visual to be able to give when people are asking for information about what does our student body look like? What are our student demographics? So I'll show you each one of these. I did some more screenshots here. So the desk audit, again, I wanted to show you what it actually looks like, but it has, a bunch of student data in there. So I wanted to cover what it's going to show you and why it's helpful. So like we were just talking about, the social security number on file, that desk audit is going to tell you your current percentage. So when you go into that, when you go click on the desk audit, you can set your date ranges for whatever you want them to be. And it's going to tell you what percentage of your current students have that social security number on file. So it's helpful if you're just wondering, what's our percentage? This desk audit will also tell you who has a current educational functioning level. So that means they've had a current NRS test, and they are counted in. So you can track people pretty easily if they don't, using that report. For me, this is really helpful because we do, for the adult academic program, we have our site, which is located in Crystal, and then we also serve students at the adult correctional facility in Plymouth. And so by being able to track that I've marked, because every time I enter a student into the database for the Hennepin County Adult Correctional Facility, I have to make sure I've checked that student as a corrections student, because we do need to track that. So it's going to tell me if I missed anybody on accident, because it happens, human error. It's inevitable. So it's nice for me to just get a whole snapshot of if I've marked all of those students as corrections students. And then at our site in Crystal, we do also have a family literacy program, so a preschool program where some of our students do bring their children with them during the day. And I have to mark all of those students as a family literacy student, so I can go compare that if I need to and make sure I didn't miss anybody there. And then on the last page of the desk audit, it's going to show you classes that you've labeled as IET, which is integrate. Oh gosh, I always get this one wrong, Belinda. Can you recall it?
Integrated education and technology?
I think, yes. Yeah, that sounds right. So if you've marked any of your classes with that descriptor, and you would determine that when you were actually creating the class, there's specific, I'm admittedly not super knowledgeable about that, but there's specific requirements for the classes that you need to have marked that. And same with the IEL Civics, the IELCE. If a class is paid for with that funding, you also need to indicate that that class is paid for by the civics grant. So just a quick snapshot again of anything you might be missing. And like I said, I check this pretty much monthly just to make sure my data is clean.
And actually, Rachel helped us a little bit there in is integrated education training.
See, I always want to say technology too. I don't know, that's just stuck in my mind for some reason. Thank you, Rachel. And then this is, like I mentioned, if you're looking at who of your current students, like maybe they started during the pandemic, you weren't able to give them a test. This will tell you really quickly what students are on that list. So then you can track who needs an NRS test, who's still attending. Obviously, there are some on my list that only attended during the pandemic or stopped attending during the pandemic before we were able to have them come in and do in-person testing again. But it is helpful. You can filter this by what the date of the student's last hours were. So I can say, oh my gosh, somebody recently attended, they only have the COVID exemption test. So I need to go ahead and make sure I catch that student and have them come in for testing. This, like I mentioned, that 5-year comparison, it just gives you a really quick snapshot. As you can see, look at how much everything dropped with the pandemic happening. But this is going to tell you month over month for the last 5 years, how many hours you're generating. And then it also tracks your GED testing hours. If you do offer GED testing at your site, you can track those hours. And so I just put them in each student's record when they come in to test with us. There's a separate form that they fill out for that. And it's tracking. So we obviously had been doing plenty of GED testing, I would say, during the pandemic. That's one thing that actually increased. So yay for that. Mm-hmm. But again, an easy thing you can pull up and print for somebody if they're wondering, how many hours are we generating? And then these awesome demographic charts. These are just great. I only took a screenshot of one, but you can print these for all 4 of these categories. So age, ethnicity, gender, and education level. It's going to give you this nice little pie chart. I've used screenshots of these in like actual reports we've had to submit to our community education department. I want to say we even put these in our 5-year narrative just to show, because it's just a nice visual of what your student body looks like. And again, if you have any questions about where to find these things, let me know, let Belinda know, or you can always contact the SID team or look at that help tab.
Yeah, great. Between COVID restrictions and online learning, Learning Student Services is relying on the various ways to stay visible to students, specifically to students in the waiting list or they waiting to start their classes. So communication tools like Remind, School Messenger are not always available to adult education programs or may require a lot of stop time to implement and to maintain. So SID is in its messaging system may be a good fit for your program. You may want to try it. So this is how it works. You create the waiting list as a class. Then you put in your students in there that you want to keep in touch with, or they're waiting to start class. And the student logs into their own CD student portal. From there, under the message tab, they can choose the staff or to direct their messages to. And after drafting their message, the student can click on the send button. The message is visible to the staff when they log in to SID, thus prompting you to draft and send back a reply. The message remains posted to the staff dashboard until you delete it. How I can send a message for people, how can I send a message to people in my class article with the complete step-by-step instructions can be found under the help tab in SID. And if folks are interested, I can demonstrate later on and during the question and answer times. Thank you.
So I just wanted to briefly talk about testing, and one of the most helpful tools I think that I made for everyone in our program. So of course, you know, people aren't giving every single type of test all the time. And if a teacher is giving a test, or if I'm not in the office and somebody else that has done we only give CASAS tests at my site specifically, but if I'm not around and one of our other CASAS certified test, somebody who's been trained to give the tests, they are filling in my absence, oftentimes they aren't doing it regularly enough to remember, how much time is this one, or what are the materials I need? So I just this is something super helpful that is hanging on, I think, like every wall in our building, just in case anybody has questions about it. So it's just telling what the appraisal consists of, how many minutes, what you need to provide that student when they're testing, like reminding people that they might need scratch paper or they might need a calculator for a math test. This is just something I kind of whipped together and provided to all of our staff. So again, there's no question about, oh my gosh, how long is that test? I can't remember, and I don't want to have to look it up in the manual. It's easier just to have a nice visual for the teachers to be able to see, and everyone in our office to be able to see. And like, it's weird, the listening test, because they get a booklet for one, so it's just all in one spot.
I think this is a really good tool to have handy, because oftentimes the students ask, how long is this going to be? How many questions? And so to have it right then and there, to be able to say it quickly, it's really, it's fantastic. And I also think that in terms of, for the sake of uniformity in terms of time, everyone 60 minutes, 75 minutes, 30 minutes, and so on. So there's no, there's no mistake there.
Well, and we all know we have those students who, when testing time is over, you have to practically pry the test booklet out of their hands, right? Because they're like, but I didn't finish, I'm not done. And I'm like, no, but your time's up. So if I have this hanging on the wall, this looks official, and I can say, everybody gets the same amount of time. You did as much as you could in that amount of time, and you did your best. So that's all.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Belinda, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So these are some of the tricks and resources that I found very important, and I use them every day. And one of them is YouTube. I'm not sure if your program's allowed for you to be browsing YouTube, but I found YouTube very useful in finding a wealth of how-to tutorial videos for myself, to learn myself, and also to share with the students. These tutorials may be helpful may be helpful in closing the digital gap, the digital literacy gap rather, of the students by showing them the step-by-step type of instructions. And in some cases, those videos with their step-by-steps are in their primary language. So as an example, I found a video that describes how the student can join Google Classrooms in Spanish, also how a student can join conferences in Schoology in Spanish. And they're very short. Usually they're about a minute or two, depending on how much they cover. And many of the times they're very generic. So that's another thing that I look for, something very generic, so that I can then kind of give them an idea of what they need to do. So I have put in some links to some of the examples that I've been using. I do them both ways. I do them in English, and I also do it in their primary language, because one, I want to learn it myself, and then the other one is for the student to do that. So as I mentioned earlier, Google, some of the programs I've been hearing throughout the day that they are more and more relying on Google translators, and it's a good tool for translating, but with the caveat that you should use simple sentences, because AI, artificial intelligence, translators do not register, if you will, the nuances of the language. And so like situations or feelings or, the emotions that you're trying to come across. So basically, if you're using any type of AI translator, I would suggest to just kind of keep it very simple. Something like your class starts on Monday. At this time and date and time, do you want classes online or at school? Do you want day or night classes, and so on? So those are much easier. And I also heard in one of the previous sessions that if you want to make sure, you can also, in Google Translate, you can go from one language to another. You can just kind of translate it from English to Spanish and then back from Spanish to English, and then see if that's really translated the way you wanted it. I have also found through Google searches a Somali English translator, and again, with the caveat of use it with simple sentences, and just so that you're just kind of making translating the information. Another resource that I found is that the more and more, our jobs are becoming more and more technical. I remember when I started some time ago, everything was paper and just files and all that kind of stuff. And now I find myself relying a lot on Google spreadsheets for, just collecting data, working with others, etc. So I would suggest that if you're interested in learning about Google spreadsheets, this particular YouTube channel, Learn Google Spreadsheets, is an excellent tutorial for all levels of proficiency. So they start you from the very beginning, step by step, all the way up to, very advanced spreadsheet figure. And this is one of the things that we have used in the past to create spreadsheets that allow us to automate some things. So for example, I use this tutorial to create a spreadsheet that would allow me to transfer the report for the distance learning proxy hours, to transfer it into format that will be just easy to upload to SID. So basically, sometimes we have a list of 100 students with hours in proxy hours, and I can process it by using this Google spreadsheet and I can upload it in 5 minutes. So imagine trying to upload 100 students with hours in 5 minutes or less by using this Google Sheets. In the next page. Yeah, and then this is the resource that I was speaking earlier about sending a text message to the student phone. We find ourselves that we're using Remind for the most part for the program, the teachers and so on. But in the office, but for Remind, the downside of it is that the person or it has to be a student register and into a class. So, but if it's just a person that is just interested in wanting to find out how to register to our program, so this is a good kind of a way to do that. Oftentimes we get requests for, send me the link to the registration or send me information about MDE GD transcripts requests. So we're starting to use this this nifty tool, which is you use your Outlook or any other email application. You send them an email by using their what is that provider, if you will. That's what it's called, the provider, the person's provider. You ask them, what is your provider, and they'll just say AT&T or something like that. So you open up your email, and at the to section, then you will say the number of their phone number, and then the @ text.att.net, and then it goes straight to their text, and any link that is embedded into the email is also live, so they're able to get to where you need them to get to. And then another type of resource that I found was the 211, which is another thing that we get a lot of requests from, where a student may be having housing difficulties, or a student is having difficulty paying the rent or so on. And so this is another place that you can go and try to refer them to and to find some resources to help them.
So we're at 1:46. No time for questions and answers, but Belinda and I have our email addresses on here. If anybody has any questions for us to follow up on, please just reach out to us, let us know. Our slides will go in the participant materials, so you'll be able to access everything afterwards, and recordings of everything will be posted shortly after. And then I will send out the evaluation for the entire conference, today's sessions, during this next session. So you'll have it when you're wrapping up at 2:45. If you could please fill out your evaluation. We use that heavily for planning this conference, and we really appreciate you for being here, and we appreciate all you do for our wonderful students in our community. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.